Hi, I'm Eben Pagan. This video and special report are called Why We Fail with Money and What to Do About It. In this series of 100% free videos, special reports, and personalized exercises, I'm teaching you about some of the dirty secrets about money that prevent us from succeeding with money and creating wealth. In these videos, reports, and exercises, I'm going to teach you a series of lessons from my self-made wealth system that people around the world have been using so you can take control of what I call your mental money maps and ultimately finally take control of your financial life and get on the path to building wealth. Now, I'm doing this, of course, to expose you to some of the powerful concepts and techniques inside my self-made wealth training and coaching program, which I'm going to be opening up on Monday, January 24th, which we'll talk more about in future videos and other things I'll be sharing with you. So let's learn about money and its dirty secrets. In the first report and video in this series, we learned that money has a hole in its own bucket and that it literally loses itself when we use it. In this session, we're going to go much deeper and learn another reason why most people fail with money and another dirty secret about money, plus learn our first important action steps toward creating self-made wealth. Now, most of the financial self-help and psychology that we hear about has to do with the bad programming that we got when we were young, or maybe about our fears about money, or maybe our bad habits like using credit cards. Now, of course, these are major causes of financial failure for a lot of people, for sure. But I think that there is something much bigger at work that none of the money gurus or the courses about making wealth talk about. And if we don't know about or understand this very powerful force that affects our financial future, we become a victim of its power. If we do learn to understand it and get control of it, I believe that we can take another powerful step to understanding and using it to our financial advantage, which leads us to money's second dirty secret, and that is that we're not wired to succeed with it. Evolutionary psychologists and a new wave of scientists that study what they call things like behavioral economics and neuroeconomics have been doing fascinating experiments with people in order to understand why our behavior around money and health is the way that it is. It turns out that they are discovering some very surprising things about why we fail with money. As we learned in our first video and report, money is very confusing for most people, but in ways that we're not consciously aware of. Now, you may be saying to yourself, I'm not confused by money. And that's the point. If we were actually aware consciously of how confused by money we are, then we would do something about it. But we're not aware of it, so we don't do anything about it, and we go through life making herd-like critical financial mistakes. So, how is money confusing to us, and why don't we notice this? Remember when we talked about fiat money? In the first report and video in this series, we learned that money used to be valuable in and of itself. Money used to be things like grain, or gold, or silver, that you could use for other things besides money if you wanted to. It had intrinsic value. Over the past few hundred years, governments realized that people like you and me will accept paper in place of this commodity money that has actual use and value. So in other words, we'll accept a piece of paper instead of a piece of gold. Paper doesn't really have any use or value inside of it, but the gold does. Now, at first, when we started using paper money, there was gold and silver that was backing the paper money, but banks and governments eventually realized that people would start accepting paper money that has nothing backing it. We moved away from using things that have real value as money to things that have no value, like paper, and then even to numbers on a computer screen to represent money in this big system of, I just trust banks and governments for it. Now, here's where it gets really confusing for the human brain. Next, banks introduced things like debt and credit cards and interest rates and interest on debt and compounding interest and monthly payments and even things like payments with zero monthly interest for a period of time and then monthly interest that compounds over time after that. Now, it's not natural for the human mind to translate value into something like time or the value of a physical object into something like money. It's hard enough when it's real money like gold or silver, never mind into paper money, never mind into borrowed money, Never mind into things that have monthly payments and interest in the future that we can't even calculate. At this point, when we start dealing with other factors, our mind actually loses the ability to rationally calculate what's going on. We lose the ability to calculate the implications that a purchase or an amount of a credit card loan or debt is going to have on our lives in the long run. And what effect does that have? Well, the first thing it does is it keeps us from ever getting ahead. And all you have to do for the evidence is look around you. Most people reach the end of their lives, retirement age, they reach it broke, dependent on others or the government. And the entire time, on the way to retirement age, they're afraid that this is how it's going to turn out. Are you afraid that you won't be financially independent at some point in your life? Are you afraid that you won't be able to take care of yourself later in life? So at first, we can blame others for these situations and say, those bad people, those evil people tricked us into using fake money and borrowing against our future and charging us interest, and on and on and on. Or we can take a different perspective. We can accept responsibility, we can realize that we're not wired to play this complex, confusing game, and that our kind of inner chimpanzee causes us to screw up when we're faced with these situations, and we can do something about it. So when I'm imagining a person trying to operate in this modern financial environment with fake money and debt and interest rates and borrowing against our futures without any guidance, I imagine someone in a foreign country trying to buy something in a huge flea market. It's a flea market where they don't speak the language, they don't know the exchange rate, and they don't know what the rules are. You can imagine that if you don't know the rules, you're going to get ripped off all day long. But again, if you're the one who does it, and you're the one who goes to the flea market in the first place, you have no one to blame but yourself. So let's talk about a real-world example that we've all faced, we've all seen. When you go buy something on credit or on a credit card, what do you use to calculate how much the purchase is actually going to cost? Now, if you're like most people, and like me in the past, you would use monthly payment as the price. Guess what? That's a huge financial mistake. Okay, you might be saying, all right, Eben, I get it. I should be thinking about total cost, right? How much the thing is going to cost in total. No, that's almost as bad as thinking in monthly payments. What we should be thinking about, okay, what we should be using as our calculation when buying something is what it's going to cost us to not invest that money, okay, to not take the money that we're going to use to buy the thing with and invest it for the next several years like rich people do. You know who Warren Buffett is, right? Right now he's the second richest man in the world, the most successful investor of all time. He's a multi-billionaire worth tens of billions of dollars, self-made. There's a legendary story of friends telling Warren Buffett years ago that he should go and buy a new car, and him saying, I just can't bring myself to buy a new car because if I spend that kind of money, it's going to cost me millions in the future. Dave Ramsey, the author, has a great example in one of his books. He talks about an average car payment of $464 costing us over $5 million, because if you invest that $464 every month and you get 12% interest over 40 years, you'd have over $5 million. Now, no one would ever believe this intuitively, but that's the math. And again, this is very confusing for most people because they wake up in their future either break even or broke and blaming a bunch of external circumstances for their situation. They never had the chance to do the math in the first place, and the mind does not do it automatically. So this brings us to another dirty little secret of money, and this is the real problem. The real problem is that we're not wired to succeed with money. Our psychological wiring is actually not set up to succeed with money. Okay, the financial reality has become too complex, too counterintuitive for us to handle. Sure, we can all earn money in a job or in a business, and we can use money to buy food and buy clothing and pay some bills. We can spend it on things. We can have some sense that we should be saving some money for later, but this is just a distraction from reality. The truth is that we don't know how money really works or what to do with it to create wealth. It turns out that in my life, I spent years in tens of thousands of dollars in growing credit card debt. My personal measuring sticks that I used when buying things were things like, how much room do I have left on my card? And how much more will this cost me per month? And how much more will this increase my minimum payment? And guess what? It just ended up getting me deeper into the problem every month, year after year. When I first started learning that I was wired backwards for success with money, it was both scary and relieving to know that I wasn't alone in my backwards thinking and that this is the way that most people naturally thought. It turns out that when most people buy things, we think in terms of monthly payments and room on my card, and we plan for how much more money we're going to earn in the future to pay for it. And it also turns out that the reason we think this way is because of the way our brains come wired from the factory. Now, of course, we're just scratching the surface here. Problems like these go much, much deeper. But until you understand that we come wired backwards for success with money, no progress can be made creating self-made wealth. So now we've learned that money has a hole in its own bucket, that we lose money when we use money, and we confuse money with real value. We've also learned that we come wired backwards for success with money and wealth. And now it's time to face another challenge that we all face with money. And it's actually another dirty secret about money. And this is money's third dirty secret. We emotionally self-sabotage. Yep, you heard me right. We self-sabotage. We actually create our own failure with money because we make important decisions when we are under the influence of emotions. Psychologists and scientists who study these topics of behavioral economics and neuroeconomics have been discovering very surprising things about how we make decisions about money, especially when the emotional pressure is on in life. And what we've discovered has completely changed how we understand the psychology of success and failure with money and wealth. So have you ever heard the common stock market advice of buy low and sell high? Sounds simple enough, right? In fact, we can make this rule even clearer by putting it this way. If you buy a stock and it goes down, get rid of it. If you buy a stock and it goes up, hold on to it. But guess what individual investors do? When they buy a stock and it goes down, they keep it. And when they buy a stock and it goes up, they sell it. And this leads to the result that most individual investors lose money. Most individual investors lose money. Why? It's simple. It's because we're wired to financially self-sabotage. And now we're going to talk about making money decisions under the influence of emotion. I call this phenomenon money self-sabotage because this is one of the most dangerous situations that we will ever face financially in our entire lives. And again, this is a land of emotion. I'd like to give you 2 rules of thumb to follow from now on with money. Rule number 1, you can't make a good buying decision when you're excited. Rule number 2, you can't make a good selling decision when you're afraid. Here's why. When you make a money decision, when you're under the influence of either of these emotions, you will self-sabotage most of the time. To understand why, we must ask another question. What are emotions? Now, I've asked a lot of very intelligent and knowledgeable scientists and psychologists and experts what emotions are. And you know what? They all come up with different answers. No one can really explain exactly what an emotion is. Even though they affect us so powerfully, we still don't know exactly what they are. Now, we don't have time to really get into a deep discussion about behavioral psychology and emotional relationships with money and so forth. Okay, that's for another day. But we've all had the experience of a strong emotion that can literally change our personality instantly. Do you notice how you literally become a different person when you're feeling a strong emotion like anger or fear or happiness? I did an interview a while back with Dr. Jeffrey Miller, the brilliant evolutionary psychologist. And I asked him what emotions were. And he gave me a great analogy. Dr. Jeffrey Miller, he thinks of emotions as like different channels that we can put ourselves on, like a TV.